Season 3 of House of the Dragon is coming out, and hopefully anything at all will happen this season. And I don't just mean Doctor Who wandering around another haunted castle. But if this season is lackluster again, I can always go back to Game of Thrones.
While Dany kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet and
what if the last seasons of Game of Thrones weren't so stupid? What if they not only told a basic, functional story, but also were at least vaguely realistic and sensible according to the world the writers set up? What if we took inspiration from real-world history? This is What, Why, How, and that's what the video's about. If you like this sort of video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and support the channel on patreon.com/whatwhyhow. Okay, let's get something out of the way right off the bat. If the TV show suddenly became realistic, then the kingdoms would not be united. The continent is just too large, there's too many lords, too many armies, too much distance between cities. It's just not realistic for these areas to be united with medieval technology. Now, if you had a dragon, that's one thing, but at the end of the TV show, spoiler alert, there's no more dragons to be ridden in Westeros. So realistically speaking, the Seven Kingdoms would split apart and never unite. The southern houses would compete back and forth for King's Landing and the Riverlands, while Dorne, the Vale, and the North would fight their own internal feuds on occasion and be their own sovereign kingdoms. So, video over, right? Actually, let's get into more detail and review the plot of Game of Thrones and then propose something that matches the historical events the TV show and the books took inspiration from. So in case you forgot the basic plot of the Game of Thrones TV show, it goes something like this. At the start of Season 1, King Robert Baratheon rules over a peaceful Westeros after having led the lords of the continent in rebellion against the evil Targaryen king. The great houses of the continent are scheming, but there isn't open war yet. But when King Bobby B gets blasted by a boar, his evil son Joffrey takes control. Now, Joffrey is secretly the baby of Queen Cersei Lannister and her brother, Jaime. Nobody likes Joffrey, especially when he executes Ned Stark, so the North declares independence under Robb Stark, while two Baratheon brothers both also claim the throne. It's a bit more complicated, but anyways, by the end of Season 3, the Baratheons have been more or less neutralized, and Robb Stark is murdered by the evil Freys and the Boltons. Meanwhile, the Lannisters, who have their base of power in the Westerlands, make an alliance with the powerful House Tyrell from the Reach by marrying King Joffrey to Princess Margaery. So basically, the Lannisters have won by Season 4. There's also Jon Snow, who you probably know, but he's having his own side plot up in the Arctic. There's also dragons.
We need to return. My people need me.
But Daenerys Targaryen is doing infinite side quests on another continent until the writers run out of excuses to keep the story going, because as soon as she gets back to Westeros, realistically speaking, that should be the end. Now, I could go into detail about all the dumb things that happen after Season 4, but I'll just give the main events. In Season 4, nothing really important happens to the overall balance of power in Westeros. The Northern Lords literally do nothing. Stannis Baratheon brings his whole army to the North Pole, and even though Tywin Lannister gets harpooned on the toilet and Joffrey Baratheon discovers an allergy to poison, the Lannisters stay in power through King Tommen, who is set to marry Margaery Tyrell instead. Oh, also there's Peter Baelish manipulating his way to controlling the Vale, somehow. In Season 5, the Northern Lords just kind of passively sit around as the evil Boltons take control of the North, while Stannis wastes his entire plotline and dies in a dumb battle against the Boltons too. Meanwhile, Peter Baelish marries Sansa Stark, who he is supposed to be obsessed with, to the evil Ramsay Bolton for some inexplicable reason, probably because the writers have something twisted in their souls. In the south, Jaime Lannister goes on a misadventure to Dorne, while King's Landing is swept up by a radical religious movement, which causes all sorts of problems until Season 6, when Cersei Lannister explodes the Vatican and wipes out all her rivals for political power in one fell swoop. King Tommen, distraught, hops from his tower, and Cersei becomes queen. But don't worry, the people of King's Landing suddenly no longer care very much about such things. The Tyrells at least have some agency. They decide to team up with Dorne to fight against Cersei. Meanwhile, Jon Snow and his half-sister Sansa Stark team up, fail to get the Northern Lords to rebel, fight against the Boltons anyways, but are saved by a Deus Ex Machina, the Knights of the Vale. That's right, Peter Baelish has finally realized he could have fought against the Boltons the entire time. Also, like most characters now, he has the power of teleportation, because they just kind of, pop up out of nowhere. Jon Snow is proclaimed king in the north, so I guess that's something interesting. Oh, also, Daenerys Targaryen finally finds her way back to Westeros with all those dragons, and also a Mongol horde, and also an army of expertly trained eunuchs. In Season 7, it's pretty obvious that the Lannisters are doomed. They have no money, and basically the entire continent is united against them. But for some reason, the writers decided that Cersei should stick around, so instead of the more interesting plotline of the good guys turning against each other, every character in the show is suddenly incredibly stupid. For example, Daenerys is convinced that she can't actually use those dragons to take King's Landing, because she might kill some people, even though later on we see her using those very same dragons to destroy just the city walls without much difficulty. I mean, what if she used the dragons to instead incinerate the Lannister army? What about their navy? But I guess she doesn't really want to do that. Even the Lannisters become incredibly stupid. They're just very lucky. They manage to somehow get the Tyrell's bannermen to join them, then they manage to steal all the Tyrell's gold with what seems like zero difficulty, and they luckily bring all that gold to King's Landing just before Daenerys remembers that she has a dragon and incinerates the rest of the wagon train, which doesn't really make much of a difference. The entire Tyrell army, which is supposed to be nearly 17,000 men, by the way, has just disappeared at this point. Meanwhile, the supposed leaders of Dorne get killed by a pirate, and then Dorne does nothing for the rest of the TV show. But I guess, you know what, that might be okay, because they weren't really doing anything anyways. The good guys, who are worried about an invasion by ice zombies, by the way, launch a whole scheme to kidnap one, and then show it to Cersei as if that's supposed to change her mind. It does not, predictably, and actually one of Daenerys' dragons gets zombified, so great plan, guys. In Season 8, the good guys face down those apocalyptic ice zombies, but it actually turns out pretty fine. I mean, some characters die, including Daenerys' horde, but then the horde comes back later and everything seems mostly alright. Somehow those pirate guys snipe a dragon despite being unable to see the dragon, so Daenerys becomes very sad, but they finally get to King's Landing, which gives him pretty much instantly, because Daenerys uses her dragons to destroy the walls. But the writers remember that they need an excuse not to have used those dragons the whole time, so Daenerys decides to incinerate the city anyways, for no real reason, killing what must be most of its people, and of course, Cersei Lannister too. Afterward, Jon Snow knifes her, somehow isn't murdered on the spot by her brainwashed bodyguards, and then the Lords of Westeros gather together to decide who should be king. Having a council of major lords decide the next king, that's pretty okay to me. The Holy Roman Empire, if you know, had a similar system, as aligned with German tradition. In England, the king gradually lost power to Parliament through, like vaguely similar circumstances, so that's fine. But here's one problem. Half of these characters are unnamed, we don't know who they are. And also, the ones that we do know, maybe they shouldn't be there. Why does Davos Seaworth get a vote? I mean, he's cool, he's one of my favorite characters, but he's not in charge of much.
I'm not sure I get a vote, but aye.
Shouldn't it be the leaders of, the actual 7 kingdoms of Westeros? Now, you might expect the Lords of Westeros to select somebody who has a sensible claim to the throne, right? Cersei's closest relative is her little brother, Tyrion Lannister, who seems diplomatic enough to get the support of a few different kingdoms, including the Westerlands and the North. But as they say in the show, everybody hates him. So how about the current Baratheon Lord? Or maybe King Robert Baratheon's bastard son Gendry, legitimized by Daenerys, and also his name is pronounced like 3 different ways, so don't roast me there. Or maybe, they could have Jon Snow be king, who has secretly been a Targaryen this whole time. Not only would this be thematically and narratively satisfying, it would make sense. Nope, the Lords of Westeros select the psychic Bran Stark to be king of Westeros. Not only does Bran Stark have zero claim to the throne of Westeros, he also has become like this weird, psychic, creepy fortune teller guy who can see like the past and the future and everything. Surely they can tell that he's a weirdo at this point. Why would they pick him? Then Sansa Stark, now leading the North, decides to secede anyways. The other Lords of Westeros nod very sagely at this, but why don't they secede too? If they're allowed, if the kingdoms can just secede, then why do the other ones decide to stay in? What are they getting out of this? Are they just waiting until it's no longer rude? Wouldn't it make much more sense for all the lords of Westeros to get together and declare, well, if there's nobody strong enough to unite us, then we might as well go our separate ways in peace and respect the sovereignty of each of our kingdoms. There'd obviously be more wars in the future, but at least there wouldn't be any tyrants anymore who could harass all the kingdoms at once. Now, maybe they voted for Bran the Broken because he's obviously weak, unpopular, and can't ever enforce his will on them. But actually, it's apparently because he has a really good story, apparently. Which is incredibly ironic to say, because his plotline throughout the whole TV show has been pretty forgettable, which is why I'm just mentioning him now. Anyways, despite Westeros now hosting a resurrected horde of horsemen and a giant army of eunuchs, those groups just kind of conveniently filter away, and it seems everything is at peace in the world, until Bran dies of pneumonia or something and we get another 10 years of civil war. There are a million other problems. Obviously, the show falls off the rails once they ran out of book material, but if the writers took greater inspiration from real history, I think it would have been a bit better. For one, as everybody knows, the series is inspired by the War of the Roses. Here's what would have happened if Game of Thrones followed that course of events. So, we'll keep everything in the first few seasons the same. So, King Robert Baratheon gets beaten by a pig, Robb Stark has a bad wedding, only tied by Joffrey's. In Season 4, Tywin Lannister and Joffrey Baratheon die, so Tommen becomes king. Now the show does realistically show how Tommen is yanked back and forth between powerful court factions. This is kind of what happened in real life to King Henry VI of the House of Lancaster, a weak, mentally unstable guy. Henry was apparently under the influence of his wife, Margaret of Anjou, whose role will be filled in our version of the TV show by both Cersei and Margaery. We can keep Season 4 pretty much like the real show, so Joffrey dies, Tyrion is put on trial, Tommen becomes king, and Tyrion harpoons his dad Tywin. So the Lannisters are left with an uncertain future. Meanwhile, Jon Snow fends off an invasion of wildlings, Daenerys can do her stuff, whatever. In Season 5, power in Westeros is wrestled back and forth between Cersei and Margaery. Cersei promotes the Sparrows but loses control, leading to the Sparrows taking control of the city. In real life, there was Jack Cade's rebellion in 1450. In Westeros, a few lords get executed, and we have Cersei's Walk of Shame. But here's a key difference. In the north, Jon Snow decides to help Stannis Baratheon fight the Boltons, kind of like the books. With the help of various northern lords, Jon Snow, and plenty of watchmen, Stannis beats the Boltons and frees the north. We can compare this to Richard of York returning back to England during Jack Cade's rebellion and rallying support. Stannis even makes Jon his warden of the north. Jon, however, is murdered by some of his own men for betraying his oath and seeking political power. This will open up a major theme for the rest of the show: when to seek power and the right reasons to seek power. In Season 6, you can have Jon Snow resurrected from the dead like the TV show in real life, that's fine, but it should actually mean something. The wildlings should crown him their king, causing conflict with Sansa, who Stannis has put in charge of the north in the meantime. When Stannis announces he's going to take his loyal forces south against the Lannisters, Jon refuses, saying they have to prepare to fight the others. He's rejected real-world politics, whereas Stannis' quest for power is just beginning. Meanwhile, Peter Baelish tries to influence the North through Sansa. The only possible resolution is for Sansa, Jon, and Arya to team up and outmaneuver Baelish, kinda like the TV show. So Jon gets the North, while Sansa gets the Vale. The climax for this season can be an army of whites breaking through some tunnel in the wall or something, but Jon leads the Northmen and fends them off. That's fine, that's normal TV show stuff. But meanwhile, Stannis Baratheon leads the large anti-Lannister alliance south against King's Landing, where Tommen has mentally broken from the stress of being a king. The Lannisters rally their army against Stannis, but are abandoned by the Tyrells. Like the English lords, Westeros' great houses constantly abandon or betray each other. The Baratheons and the Lannisters fight a costly battle, with both sides losing many men. The Lannisters have no choice but to flee for the Westerlands, while Stannis limps to King's Landing and is celebrated as a liberator for about 10 minutes before his religious proclivities clash with the Sparrows. I think it's a major missed opportunity in the show to continue exploring the religious divides between Westeros. Stannis expects all the lords of Westeros to loyally submit to him as king, but even his allies don't really want to do that. This is kind of what happened to Richard of York, and it makes sense in Westeros, where everybody is using each other to maximize their own political power. Why would they want a strong king in King's Landing? Meanwhile, Daenerys Targaryen, returns to Westeros from her exile. In Season 7, the Seven Kingdoms are split fully apart. Everybody is trying to form alliances against everybody else, though basically nobody is successful since their interests are so opposed. Game of Thrones is best when you can root for both sides of a conflict. Anyways, Jon journeys down to Dragonstone and meets with Daenerys, bringing a captured wight as a show and tell. Unlike the other suitors, he requests her help not for power, but to save Westeros from the others. She says she will consider, after he sails to King's Landing to try to get Stannis to lend him support against the others too, only to find Stannis is hated in the city and about to launch a hasty military campaign against the Lannisters before it's too late. Stannis now craves power too much to help Jon. But meanwhile, Daenerys instead agrees to an alliance with the Lannisters. With Margaery dead, Tommen is an eligible bachelor. Both Cersei and Daenerys, advised by Tyrion, think they can get the better of one another. Jon travels with Stannis to try to convince him, but Stannis' army is attacked by Daenerys' forces, who have sided with the Lannisters. Stannis dies in battle, like Richard of York. As Jon and the Baratheon loyalists retreat and lick their wounds, they discover Stannis has legitimated Jon as Jon Stark and named him his heir, making him king of the Seven Kingdoms. He'll be our Edward IV. Now, at this point, basically every army rushes right for King's Landing. Daenerys gets to King's Landing first, but Jon doesn't want power. Instead, he offers her marriage in exchange for help against, those ice zombies. Seeing Jon's conviction and with the hostile armies of Westeros all converging on King's Landing, Daenerys agrees to postpone her quest for power and head north. Meanwhile, the Lannisters ally with Dorne against the Reach, defeating them in a major battle. Cersei puts Tommen back on the throne, like the restoration of Henry VI in real life. Early in Season 8, Daenerys and the North fight off the others at great cost. This is a good opportunity to give a bunch of characters heroic endings. In the TV show, not many die. Meanwhile, the Lannisters have cemented their control over the South. The two sides plunge into war, but at this point the Targaryen-Stark alliance is much weaker than the Lannisters, since they just fought off all those ice zombies that the writers really want to include in the story. Since both the show and the books often default to good versus evil storylines, here's that. But Cersei's brutal rule has alienated the Lords of Westeros. At the climactic battle at the end of the season, many lords defect to the anti-Lannister side, and Cersei is defeated. Compare that to the real-life Battle of Bosworth. Daenerys and the North win and take over King's Landing. Nobody goes crazy and burns down the whole city for no reason, so there's none of that. Cersei is exiled, and an alternate house is put in charge of the Westerlands. Since all the great houses are too exhausted to fight anymore, they pledge loyalty to the new Targaryen-Stark dynasty. If you really want, you can have Jon die in battle or something, like Richard III, and instead Daenerys allies with Bran Stark. And that is basically the end of the TV show. So, if you know your history, I've obviously combined a few historical figures and condensed decades of the War of the Roses into just a few seasons of a TV show, but that's what the show in real life does. Edward IV, for example, was king for about 12 years after he deposed Henry VI. In our version of the storyline, Jon is in King's Landing for like a month. Also, Henry Tudor married Edward IV's daughter, obviously not Edward IV himself. And the Battle of Bosworth was a York defeat, not a York victory, but the key dramatic moments of War of the Roses are transferred to the world of Westeros in this proposal. Now, if you really wanted to follow strictly the events of War of the Roses, everything would be stretched out, and Daenerys would marry like a Lannister cousin or something, and also they'd all be fighting in France half the time, because that's what was happening in real life. And the War of the Roses. Maybe France would be like the Reach, and there'd be some dynastic struggle there that everybody's involved in, but that's not really in the books, and it's not really in the TV show, so it seems like a really big addition to put that in. In this plotline, by the way, the Targaryen restoration is kind of like the restoration of the Han dynasty after about 20 years of rule by some different dude. It would make sense for the trajectory for the future of Westeros to be increasing centralization by powerful Targaryen Stark kings, kind of like how England grew more centralized after the War of the Roses, except, with dragons. If instead Daenerys dies for some reason, and so does Jon, then the route the TV show took would make some more sense. The Lords of Westeros gather together in a council, with each major kingdom having a say in who the next king should be. Or, as I said in the beginning of the video, it might make even more sense for the kingdoms to just split apart. I mean, Westeros is supposed to be the size of like South America, apparently, so these are the size of countries. Without dragons, I don't know if anybody could keep control of the whole continent. But I think that's enough for today. Comment below if you have any ideas about this video, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out patreon.com/whatwhyhow and support the channel for just $1 a month and keep it alive like those current generous people on the screen right now. Thank you very much, and adios.